Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media present here with us, and those of you following us on your various houses and platforms. Good afternoon to fellow citizens, both at home and abroad. Once again, we're gathered here to do our COVID response communications, and today we have the same team, which you're familiar with, and we'll use a similar format, asking Dr. Parasram to lead his team in presenting the technical data. Then I will speak to you after, and the minister would come in after, and then we'll have our question section. So, let's go. Dr. Parasram.
Hi, good afternoon, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, colleagues, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. So I will begin with the clinical update. As of 4th of June 2021, total number of public and private tests, just under 200,000, 196,854, 529 new positives reported in the last 24 hours, taking our total since March 12th to 25,801. Our total recovered patients, 15,196. Active cases are now 10,049. Number of deaths stand at 556. And total patients in hospital, 428. Those that stepped down, 145. Total patients in state quarantine are at 88. And those in home isolation, 8,947. As of 4 p.m. yesterday, we would have vaccinated with the first dose, both vaccines combined, 110,110, and fully vaccinated, 1,179. So Dr. Hines will give his usual epidemiological update, followed by Dr. Richards will go into details of the clinical picture in the hospitals, and Dr. Trotman will give us some brief intervention about the public health guidelines and vaccination. Dr. Hines?
Thank you, CMO, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, colleagues, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. The epidemiologic update using data as at June 4th is as follows. Looking at the epidemic curve, which sorts the numbers of cases not by date of publication of the result, but date of swabbing, we see a shape that's emerging in those cases for the month of May, putting the peak around the middle of May, and we're seeing that there is a progressive, though slow, decrease moving towards the right-hand side of this graph, indicating hopefully that we are starting to see smaller numbers on a day-by-day basis in terms of the swab dates, but still it's very early days, and some of this data may change retrospectively. Nonetheless, the shape that's emerging gives us the overall impression of a peak having occurred around the middle of May, and hopefully we're moving from peak to plateau to decline. Time will tell as we get additional data coming in. The new color at the end, the blue, for want of a better term, is the data day by day for the month of June. If we look at this on a week-to-week basis, what we see is that weeks 20 and 21, which would be the weeks that started on the 16th of May and then the following week on the 23rd of May, those weeks were almost the same in terms of absolute total. Whereas we had seen week-to-week increases of large percentages, that particular week-on-week increase was only 0.3%, indicating to some extent some measure of slowing. And when we add the data for today, as it has come in preliminarily, we're looking at what may be about a 10% decrease overall in this week's total, that is week 22 from the 30th of May to the 5th of June, as compared to the week before. So again, an indicator hopefully that the numbers of cases coming out of the system have begun to slow even marginally. Alongside that, if we look at that orange or salmon-colored background, what we see for the positivity, which is the percentage of swabs done that come back with a positive COVID result, we are seeing that that percentage positivity is also now beginning to fall a bit. It had peaked somewhere around 47% and is now down to about 38 or so, as at the data yesterday. On a month-to-month basis, basic similar patterns in terms of totals for May and then the positivity in the background. And so far for June, we have 1,892 cases. We're hoping that with this slowing that we're seeing, we will not approach the sort of total that we saw in May, and that we're on the decline with respect to cases accumulating, which would indicate that the measures that have been implemented are beginning to bear fruit and have some form of effect. Looking at the demographics, the only thing to point out here is that whereas we would have seen maybe a 53 to 47% male to female ratio in earlier times, we've been seeing a progressive shift towards equality, 50-50. We're at 50.6% male, 49.4% female at this point. Still with the largest group being that working age group, 25 to 49, working mobile. The deaths among men versus women, the proportion that we had been seeing before, where men were about 3/4 of the deaths, in recent times that proportion has changed somewhat, so now we're seeing a 60-40 split, males to females. Again, with the majority of the deaths occurring in the over 60s, and the minority, about 35-36% or so, in the 60 and under, 59 and under. Looking at what had been projected and what happened subsequently, we are continuing to see signs of the cumulative totals slowing bit by bit, whereas when we spoke last week, we thought that at the rate we were going at that point in time, we may have doubled the May 16th total by tomorrow or day after tomorrow. We are now seeing that we may have extended that timeline by about a week. So instead of a doubling time of 21 days, we're now looking at possibly 28, which again is moving slowly but surely, hopefully, in the right direction with respect to slowing of that accumulation of cases. If we look at the current and projected cases, we see that this green line that has gone way up very quickly was the projected number of cases that we expected to see if we had continued at the rate we're going at the end of April, where we would have surpassed 40,000 cases cumulatively by about the 28th or so of May. We would have been at about 50,000 by the end of May. And we're seeing that the blue bars, the heights of those blue bars, started to fall away from that projection early-ish, somewhere around the middle of May, and they continued to decrease in the speed with which they were growing. We put another projection on there looking at the speed we were going just before the onset of the effect of those curfew measures, so the 2 weeks just before that. And even using that new projection, which is the orange line, we see that there's some continued deceleration, which is an encouraging sign that the implementation of these measures has been bearing some form of fruit. And if we look at the active cases, what we're projected with those, which is the stream of yellow dots moving upwards, as opposed to what eventually occurred with the green line, we see that whereas we projected we'd probably get to 10,000 active cases by the 22nd of May, we managed to delay that accumulation by about a 2-week period. So we've only now gotten to that 10,000 case landmark as of yesterday. And this is what we refer to when we speak about the flattening of the curve, the ability to slow the accumulation of cases and keep the numbers within what could be managed by a health system is what we mean when we say flattening that curve. And we're seeing the demonstrations of that in the comparison between what actually occurred and the original projections from about the 2nd of May or so. So again, more indications that the measures taken have begun to manifest some sort of effect, and we need to continue that in order to continue the deceleration. I'll now turn you over to Dr. Abdul Richards to speak about the details of the parallel healthcare system.
Good afternoon to the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Ministers of Health, National Security, Energy, and the Office of the Prime Minister, to my medical colleagues here, led by the Chief Medical Officer, members of the media, the viewing and listening population of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much for once again joining us at our media briefing this afternoon. This afternoon, I'd like to provide a brief update on the status of the hospitals in the parallel healthcare system as of 8 a.m. this morning. As my colleague Dr. Hines would have shared, the rolling average is gradually decreasing. We are currently at 454 today from 469, And that accounts for the number of persons who may require care. And that's why we look at that daily number of confirmed cases as a predictor for persons who require hospitalization. Similar to the trend that we would have noticed last Saturday, there continues to be a narrowing of the gap between admissions and discharges. That is, the number of persons that require medical care, that is, persons who are to be admitted, is roughly equal to those being discharged. This continues to be a tight balance in the parallel healthcare system at our hospitals and step-down facilities. This graph demonstrates the actual number of net admissions, that is, the additional number of cases or persons requiring medical care on a daily basis by week. And you would have noticed here that that number is decreasing slowly but surely from week 18, when we saw a peak in terms of the number of cases and when we started with some of the increased restriction measures. This just demonstrates the actual admissions and discharges by what we refer to as epidemiological weeks, or weeks in terms of how we look at the number of persons being admitted and discharged. Now, this graph is a new one that, that we wanted to introduce to the population, that demonstrates the actual number of persons in the facilities in the parallel healthcare system. At present, there are 15 step-down and hospitals facilities in the parallel healthcare system. And over the last week or so, we have noticed a plateauing in the total number of confirmed COVID-positive patients requiring care at hospitals. Over the last 2 days, we've actually seen a minimal decline. So we are moving into a sort of plateau, into a very minimal decline phase over the last week. This is the occupancy graph to which we would have become accustomed to. And I'd like to remind everyone that occupancy really would be a measure of the capacity of the parallel healthcare system and the overall healthcare system to care for persons with COVID. Now, the occupancy is really dependent on the increasing number of beds that are made available and resources. And yes, we have been seeing a slow decline in terms of the occupancy, especially over the last week. And that really is related to, one, the increased resources that have been allocated, that is additional beds. We had 60 additional beds added at the St. James Medical Complex and another 16 at the Field Hospital Port of Spain over the last week. But additionally, we've had a decreasing number of persons requiring care. So that balance has resulted in a decreasing overall occupancy as well as in Trinidad and Tobago. This is just a brief snapshot of the percentage occupancy at our hospitals. We would have been speaking about that 75% danger zone. And this week, for the first time, most of our hospitals, as of last night, that is the places that would, or the facilities that managed the most ill COVID-positive patients, were under 75%. The Arima General Hospital continues to be above 75%, but the admission-discharge rate continues to be tightly managed to ensure all patients receive proper care. The ward-level patients were a category that was in high demand, and it represents really that first level of care for persons once confirmed as COVID-positive. And we added several beds over the past month in this particular category. We have noticed an overall decline in the occupancy of ward-level beds, and this decline has been or can be attributed mainly to the increased number of beds and resources allocated for this level of patient, as well as the decreasing number of patients actually requiring hospitalization over the past week. It is important to note that the ICU and HDU levels are still high. At present, this morning, the ICU occupancy was at 90%, and the HDU occupancy is at 82%, meaning that persons continue to be very ill and with COVID-19. This is just a slide to demonstrate the status of COVID-positive patients in the accident and emergency, because not only do we look at the occupancy in the wards, but we look at the precursor, which would be persons who are awaiting transfers to a site in the accident and emergency. And again, you would notice generally a plateauing. There's just a slight increase at the NCRHA, but the overall trend is one of a plateau versus or a decline. The ambulance transport system, a downward trend in terms of usage for COVID-19 transports, and generally a declining pattern in terms of the time required for an ambulance, which demonstrates a trend of less persons requiring transfers between facilities or from home. In closing, members of the population, I would like to request that you please do not become prematurely comforted by this trend or projection that we have noted with regards to a plateauing or a seemingly decrease in the occupancy levels of our hospitals. The healthcare system continues to be resilient. We continue to try our best to allocate resources to ensure that every citizen receives the level of care that he or she deserves. However, our only armor against this fight against COVID-19 continues to be the 3 W's. Let's continue to wash our hands, let's watch our distance, and let's wear our mask properly. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd like to now pass you on to Dr. Trotman.
Honorable Prime Minister, Ministers, CMO, colleagues, my healthcare workers, fellow healthcare workers, members of the listening and viewing public, and members of the media. We are at a sombering time, but yet we are at an encouraging time. As with Trinis, when it's time to celebrate, we tend to relax. I'm here to remind you that we stand on our foundation in the fight against COVID-19, the basic foundation that we must continue to use. You have seen that maybe there is a slither of encouragement with the numbers, but the fight is not over. It's just beginning. We need now that when you are offered the vaccine, that you take the vaccine, whichever it is. It has many benefits. And some people will say, well, what about the side effects? But let's just wait. A little soreness in your hand, maybe a little body aches, maybe a little fever. Let's balance that with life. Let's balance that with protection of your family members, your mother, your grandmother, your brother, your sister. I think that tips the scale towards taking the vaccine when it is offered, whichever it is. Just look beyond our shores to countries that were in much worse positions than we are. Where are they now? With their public health measures and with the vaccine, different horizons are there. So please, when the vaccine is presented to you, take it, whichever it is. And while doing so, remember our public health measures, your 3 W's. We'll always want to keep those. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and watch your distance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to ask Dr. Hines to bring up his the blue bar graph, right, that one, to respond to our efforts with respect to what the projections had indicated we would have been facing had we not intervened in the way that we have, and to indicate what level of suppression we have been able to accomplish so far. So could you indicate, using your graph, as to what the suppression effects would have been so far?
Okay, so this graph shows 3 things that we need to pay attention to. The blue bars are the numbers of total cases as they accumulated from day to day. It actually starts in February and it continues up to the cases as at the 4th of June, which were just over 25,000. the green curve that we see above those blue bars is a projection looking at if we had continued at the sort of exponential rate that we were moving at when we were at the last 2 weeks or so of April, average over those last 2 weeks before any of the measures that had been put into place would have taken effect. If we look at the shape and the height of that green line, we see, for example, that the green line crosses the axis of 40,000, that height. If you look over to your left, the y-axis gives you a number of 40,000. It crosses that around the 27th or so, 27th or 28th of May. It means that at that point in time, if we had continued at the speed we were going at, we'd already have accumulated 40,000 cases. And because exponentials go faster and faster, by this point in time, we would actually be closer to 80,000. We didn't actually project the graph that far for the simple reason that the scale then becomes a little, it becomes too wide. The height of the bar would have been a little too high. But we would be somewhere in the 80,000 region around this point in time if we continued strictly at that exponential rate, as opposed to the 25,000 that we are at now with the day's figures as at yesterday. Even if we recalculate because we knew we had some slowing because of some of the measures, and we look at the speed we were going at before the most recent SOE measures, etc., were put into place. That orange line, which is the more recent projection at a slower rate, still projects that we would have been upwards of 30,000 by the end of, well, by today actually, as opposed to the 25,000. So even within a week's time, we have again decreased that accumulation by several thousand. So we are seeing where the projections were worse than what is currently happening as a result of the measures that had been implemented previously and began to take effect and slow the accumulation of cases, even in those comparing those two time frames, one to the other. The worst time frame when we were really accelerating at the end of April, and then even as we started to slow some of the measures and we implemented more measures, we saw that there was additional effect, additional slowing. And those numbers are people. Out of those numbers, that 5,000 suppressed, out of the nearly 60,000 that we would have had additional, we would have a certain number, a certain proportion of people dying as a result, a certain proportion of people hospitalized and unable to, or needing hospitalization and unable to get it if we continued at that rate. So it's not just a mathematical calculation, but it translates into suppression of demand on systems, continued or additional ability for the systems to supply the needs of the population, and the success of the measures in at least slowing, although not completely stopping or eliminating, slowing the rise enough for the system to attempt to keep pace, which is all that you can do in the midst of a surge. And that's what we refer to when we say flatten the curve.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hines. I think what Dr. Hines has a difficulty in telling you is the real bad news of the bullet that we are dodging. And that is, if we had not intervened to get the kinds of results that we are getting, we now talk about 25,000 infected persons on any day around now. And from that population of infected persons, we averaging somewhere between, as you would have seen, 15 and 20 deaths per day. Had we not intervened to do something about that and allow that green curve to dominate our existence, generating between 80 and 90,000 as against 25,000, from that population of infected people, the average number of deaths per day would have been about 100. And I want the population to digest that. And remember how we felt when we had the reports of 25 deaths. Because this is exactly what has happened elsewhere in the world, so we're not just making this up from a mathematical curve. or from statistical analysis. In fact, to assume 100 out of 90,000 infected persons is to look on the good side, because it could easily be more because of the effect of the increase. The effect of the increase is not straight mathematical. It could be probably exponential. So we were looking at a choice of doing nothing or ineffective action and facing a population of infected people approximating 90,000 to 100,000 it could possibly have been, and facing deaths of 100,000, 100 people per day. And of course, if you look at the end of the week after 100,000, that's 1,000 people, 700 people for the week. How could this population have dealt with that? Those are the kinds of things that we actually dealt with in 1918, that kind of, when we didn't know how to handle it and what to do. So from the very beginning, we have been following a step-by-step approach, relying on the population being aware of the dangers, the outcome, and the actions to be taken. Initially, at the very beginning, we sought to avoid the virus coming to us. So that was the period of avoidance. That's when we quickly shut down our border to people coming from, firstly from China. If they had left there less than 14 days, they couldn't come straight into Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, soon after, we went to some European countries, Italy, Spain, the United, and so on, because they had become infected. And we tried to avoid the virus getting to us, knowing full well that it was quite likely that it would get to us, because this nature of the infection, we could not escape it if the whole world was getting involved. And sooner rather than later, we did confirm our first. So we tried to avoid it. Then now we were called upon to suppress it. And that suppression would have been our action in the first total lockdown that we engaged in. You remember that period? April last year, shut our border, shut the country down, and try to suppress the flow of the virus into the population. And of course, eventually we got the infection spread slowly. We had some spikes, and then we had some community spread. And what we did in 2020 was to try to hold our position as healthily as we could, as safely as we could, while the solution would be on its way. That solution was the search for vaccines, getting the gene sequencing done in labs outside of our country, outside of our control, and waiting for the news that vaccines had been found to be efficacious and soon would be available for use by the human population. That came to us towards the end of 2020, that scientific news that, yes, vaccines were. And interestingly enough, all of us, by a few countries of the world, realized that once vaccines become available, from a scientific standpoint, the next big issue would have been production and distribution of those vaccines. And we know how the world works. He with more corn, feed more fowl. So to avoid that, the decision was taken in this international program called COVAX, where all countries, based on your economic and population size, would pay into this program to allow the science to take place and to commit yourself to purchasing some vaccines at the beginning of the program to quickly deal with those persons who were most exposed. We in Trinidad and Tobago, I think it was last year, November, or by about November last year, we made our COVAX payment, and that payment was made by all the countries that were involved in this search for and expect to get some vaccine for your initial program. That COVAX initial payment was not meant to pay for all the vaccines that you require. In fact, the figure that we were allocated in that program was 100,000. and we expected to get 100,000. But remember, these things have to be produced and distributed. They were not coming from a mountain that you dig it and go like a mine. They had to be produced in the factory and then distributed. So as fast as they were being produced, they were being claimed and distributed. We never got that 100,000 as we anticipated prior, but we were in the program. And the program was able, after some delay caused by unavailability of the vaccine, we got our first shipment of the COVAX vaccine of 33,600, and then we got a second shipment that is on its in the program. So the COVAX 100,000 is almost with us. We have one more shipment of 33,600 to get, and that would have covered our involvement in the program, in the COVAX program. But of course, initially we had anticipated that at the start of the program, March, possibly April, we should have got that 100,000, and we would have dealt with our frontline, our healthcare people, and our aged and infirm people. But it didn't happen like that. We are now in June, and we still only have got 2/3 of the COVAX 100,000. But in a population of 1.4 million, we really are targeting that 1 million adults, a huge percentage of them. So we're talking about 600 to 700,000 people being vaccinated to be fairly comfortable that a large enough proportion of the population is vaccinated. And the issue of vaccine availability became the problem. It's no longer avoiding the virus. It's no longer immediately to suppress the virus, because we keep on suppressing along the way. And the holding program was to end with the arrival of the vaccines. Now, as a country, Trinidad and Tobago, we took the position that we will, for good reason, only vaccinate with vaccines that are WHO approved, World Health Organization approval, because this item, a vaccine, has all kinds of consequences going with it. And therefore, you want to be sure that what comes into the country, as the first line of defense, what comes into the country and what is used on the population, either by the public sector, the government, or the private sector, are vaccines that are deemed by an authority to be safe and effective. And that safe and effective stamp comes to us from a WHO approval. So only vaccines that are WHO approved would have been allowed into Trinidad and Tobago. And the first WHO approved vaccine generated a lot of discussion in this country and a lot of excitement among those of us who were waiting on the vaccine. And I want to ask that, we got a couple of slides there. I want to put up a slide, take you through a few slides, because I want this population to be completely informed and make informed decisions. This slide speaks to a position on the 5th of April. This would have been this time, early April, last few days of March. This would have been when all the manima was taking place in Trinidad and Tobago about the government being late and delaying and wouldn't bring the vaccine in and get. This slide comes from information from the Serum Institute of India, which was the first producing location for the first WHO-approved vaccine. And by the 5th of April, you would see there where it says, the Serum Institute may apply to sell COVID vaccines commercially. No COVID vaccine in the world has marketing authorization allowing sales in the private market. This is what, as Prime Minister of this country, I have been telling the population is the state of affairs. So you couldn't just go out there and buy this vaccine because it is now approved by WHO and is being, AstraZeneca is not an Indian vaccine. This company is a Swiss, British company. And it's Oxford University that made this breakthrough. And that's where it was. But the main production facility was in India. And by the 5th of April, you see here where it is being thought that they may apply for approval to put this vaccine into commerce, meaning that it can be sold and bought. Remember, just reflect on what was happening in Trinidad and Tobago at that time. We got, if you put the next slide up, same Serum Institute. The Serum Institute manufactures at its Pune plant. Its current license for making the Covishield is for emergency. So far, and this is now the 5th of April, no COVID vaccine in the world has a marketing authorization allowing sales. No COVID vaccine in the world has marketing authorization. So at this time in Trinidad and Tobago, we are beginning to talk about the private sector go and get vaccine because the government not getting it done, because the government is incompetent and the Prime Minister lazy and we don't know what we're doing. And all we were saying to you, with all our best efforts, there's no vaccine available for purchase. And the whole world was still relying on this production from these major facilities in India, because this is where the facilities existed. And of course, what happened after that? We got into the business of trying to buy vaccines from this source. And this slide tells you, and you're speaking here about the government of India. The government has said that is also in talks with global producers of the Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson vaccines for additional supplies to India. So here we were, waiting to be able to buy from India, where there was no authorization for sale. Up comes an outbreak in India, and the whole thing has turned around, where the Indian government is now looking for vaccines from outside of India, authorization from other producers, because of the massive outbreak that took place in India. What that did, our stream of where we look for vaccines, what is the prospect? See, it says there, but these makers have said they can discuss availability only by October of this year. We are still in June now. Here it is, the possibility for these suppliers supplying the calamity in India with vaccines, talking about no earlier than October. And of course, the other slide will tell you India's current urgent need to supply its own population led to the government halting vaccine exports in March. That's when we were in contact with the government and the private sector in India, trying to buy vaccines. Halting exports in March. So April, when all this talk about get the vaccine, bring the vaccine, there was a halting of the export in March. And the reason being what was happening in India. Although some smaller donations have been allowed, as well as a limited amount to the global COVAX vaccine sharing scheme, there's no indication that larger exports will resume anytime soon. And that's what we're experiencing now. We did take part in receiving a small donation. We are one of the Caribbean nations that got a small donation, but there was no export to the world from India anticipated any time soon. That's what's going on now. The Serum Institute of India has made it clear it won't begin exporting vaccine until the end of the year at earliest. That is what we were facing. That is what we are facing. But what has been our approach from the beginning? Firstly, we were in the COVAX. We paid in, and at the earliest availability, we receive. We also, at the level of CARICOM, sought to align and associate ourselves with the African Medical Supply Platform. Because what was happening then is that these companies were taking the position that they were only considering huge orders. And because of the 50-odd countries in Africa buying together, they were likely to get a big order. And because of our diplomatic arrangement with them through the CARICOM, we decided to make an arrangement, and they agreed with us that whenever they get their supplies, the CARICOM would piggyback on it. And we had through CARICOM, interestingly enough, Trinidad and Tobago chairing CARICOM. So I was directly involved in this matter with the CARICOM Secretariat. And we had to wait until they were successful in getting their orders. And you would have seen when Ghana got their first amount and Nigeria got some. And the main thing is that they were not getting any large amount. However, the other arrangement was the bilaterals. Where could we, country to country, find any vaccine? You remember talking to Prime Minister Motley one night, and she confirmed that that was when Barbados had their outbreak. In the middle of the outbreak, she was able to get from the government of India, who got from the Serum Institute of India, 100,000 vaccines, and she offered me 2,000, and I accepted that. But remember, I said to you, the position of Trinidad and Tobago is that we will only use WHO-approved vaccines. At the time when we got those 2,000 vaccines from Barbados, they were not approved by WHO, and therefore could not have been used on receipt. But the government of Barbados, having only that available in the middle of an outbreak, had taken the decision to use those vaccines. However, the approval was not very far away, and while we had those 2,000 vaccines in hand, soon after, that first approval came for AstraZeneca, and then we were able to use those 2,000 vaccines. So we also, under the bilateral arrangements, dealing here with the government of China, we got 100,000 vaccines from China. And later on, because of vaccine utilization issues in some of our CARICOM neighbors, we were able to get 16,000 from St. Vincent, 9,000 from Bermuda, 8,000 from Grenada. This gives us, in total, under these bilateral arrangements, government to government, 175,000 doses. And if you add that to the 67, Grenada was 10,000, sorry. 10,000, a bit more than it. So we had 180,000 vaccines, which we got in our country-to-country arrangement, and of course, the 67,000 that we got under the COVAX. That's the total amount of vaccines that we've had in hand up to the present time. So we also, at the very beginning, from a payment standpoint, we paid into the COVAX, we made preparations to pay into the African Medical Supply Platform, and we also had placed tentative orders in India, which, as I mentioned a while ago, came to naught because those facilities were not now in a position to make any available, but we had sought purchase there. And we also, more recently, have made arrangements for further purchase of vaccines, Sinopharm, from China. So the bottom line is, where are we today with respect to vaccines? Since I spoke to you last, when I told you that we've made 2 substantial payments, those 2 payments, one was those arrangements were being made to get a further significant shipment from China that has been formalized, and I'm advised by the ministers who are following that on a day-to-day basis that next week, Thursday, we should have a shipment, a significant shipment from China. It's going to be more than we had the last time. And of course, most satisfying is that we have made the payment as required into the African Medical Supply Platform. And you may recall, I had told you that, and you would have seen in the various news items, that the African Medical Supply Platform had made its move to get AstraZeneca, because AstraZeneca was what was approved early. Later on, other suppliers got approval, which was Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. And certain issues had arisen, and in South Africa in particular, with that first variant, and the AstraZeneca vaccine was not found to be usable in South Africa. The African Medical Supply Platform switched its order from the 2-dose AstraZeneca to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is what was approved recently, and the main African medical supply order was Johnson & Johnson. What that did, it put the Caribbean through that effort in working with that platform to get Johnson & Johnson vaccines when that becomes available. We are now advised, having made our payment last week, that we are in line to get 800,000 doses of Johnson & Johnson 1-dose vaccine. That has changed the picture completely with respect to how many persons as against how many doses. Because the doses I mentioned a while ago, 180,000, if you have to use that for 2 doses, you can only completely vaccinate half that number of people, 140,000, thereabouts. But the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, being a 1-shot vaccine, 800,000 there mean 800,000 people. And that is, we are anticipating the arrival of the first batch of that vaccine in August. So it means that for the next 8 weeks, our vaccination program would be largely confined to what we can get out of the COVAX. We're expecting a 3rd shipment that will complete our 100,000 from our first payment and our involvement. We are expecting a steady flow from the Sinopharm, next shipment on Thursday, and then we begin to look for a 3rd one somewhere down the road. But it means that this is not the beginning of the end. It probably, if I may quote the famous Winston Churchill statement, is the end of the beginning. But we can now confidently say that we have a vaccination program that by the next 12 weeks, June, July, August, within 12 weeks, depending on the shipping arrangements, we would be able to vaccinate a substantial amount of people. Our first target is 500,000 people in this country. And based on the irons we have in the fire, we can now, as I mentioned last week, begin to accelerate our vaccination program because we can say we have vaccines for an accelerated program. The minister will give you some details on that after. And of course, if all goes well, because you saw how things went pear-shaped with the AstraZeneca expectation from India, you saw how quickly it changed from India being the vaccinator of the world to the virus saying, no, you need some vaccines here. So India became a requiring nation for vaccines. So it can change drastically because of that kind of development. But assuming that it remains on track, where the Africans platform will be serviced from the suppliers in the way that they are expecting now, in the way that we paid into an allocation, and the usage of what we are getting in the programs that we have going on, we can now fairly reasonably say that we are at the beginning of what is required to bring this infection under control, to have some semblance of normalcy returning to our country and our lives, where we live with the virus as a vaccinated population, where the virus infection, the rate of hospitalization, and I dare say the rate of death would be considerably lower and managed in a way that we get the least effect of the virus. And by September 1st, which is end of August, which is September, our target looking at when the schools open in mid-September, we should be in a far better position and be more of a vaccinated population than we were in March or April. And that is where we are heading. The minister will tell you how we are going to be moving to make sure that every dose of vaccine that we have in this country is in somebody's arm. Now, I haven't mentioned the most recent development, and that is our diplomatic contact with the United States. For the last few weeks, we have been involved, I myself personally, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, we have been involved in a series of friendly contacts with all the openings that we have in the United States. And I must say today, as chairman of CARICOM and Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I want to thank some specific persons in the United States system for working with us night and day to bring to the attention of the administration in the United States the need to pay attention to the Caribbean, the CARICOM, as part of the American system in a pandemic. I speak specifically about the Representative Maxine Waters from California. She chairs the banking committee in Washington. Chairman of the Homeland Security, Chairman Benny Thompson, Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Chairman Greg Weeks, and of course, the Vice President Kamala Harris, who got in making the case for the Caribbean as well. And of course, Minister Brown has been virtually at the door. Minister Brown and Ambassador Philip Spencer, our lobbyists in Washington, they all have been working overtime. And we have heard recently that the United States is making additional vaccines available into the COVAX mechanism. Because picture us getting that 100,000 when the next shipment comes in. That would have closed us off in COVAX. But the COVAX mechanism is meant to work beyond that. But for it to work, more vaccines have to be made available to the COVAX managers. So the United States government has taken a position that they will make more vaccines available into the COVAX. So we, as a participant in the COVAX, can expect to get some more. How many more, we don't know at this stage, because we still don't know what the American system means. But that additional 25,000 vaccines that be made available, you would have heard, as a result of the advocacy being done for specific action on the Caribbean, the CARICOM, that of that 25 million, 6 million will be allocated to the Caribbean and Latin America. Now, please don't get carried away with that as any solution. It's a good opening. It's a good start. But 6 million doses of vaccines, which may even be two shots, we don't know. But even if it's a one-shot vaccine, 6 million doses for 457 million people doesn't go very far with respect to treating the population that requires to be vaccinated. But the opening of the door for allowing the vaccines to come to us, either through purchased or gift, that's a good step. South America, where we are part of the South American system, South America and the Caribbean, we are among the worst served in the world right now for vaccines, because it's not produced in our zone. There's nobody in the South and the Caribbean producing this vaccine. We are at the mercy of the producers elsewhere in the world, whether it is Asia, Europe, or North America. And that may be the reason why our the penalty that we are paying in deaths and sickness in Latin America and the Caribbean, we are among the highest in the world. And of course, this development of vaccines coming to the region from a major supplier is a major development, but the numbers are not yet influential. When I say that by September, we should be in a position of vaccinating upwards of the 2/3 that we're aiming at, I did not include what may come to us from this American initiative. But we anticipate that in the June-July period, we will be receiving vaccines in addition to what I've just outlined to you. And when we put all of that together, we should be able to have met the biological requirement of vaccinating so many people in this country that the virus would not be as virulent as it could be, because our population would be in a better position to respond. Remember, the vaccine is not a cure. The vaccine doesn't eliminate. What it does, it makes the individual human body respond better. That if you do get infected, You try to avoid being infected, but if you do get infected, that your clinical response will be better. You won't require hospitalization, and of course, you're not likely to die. That's what the vaccine gives us. And oh yes, I forgot one of our major activists in the United States system, Congressman James Clyburn from South Carolina. He is the chief whip in the parliament there, and he has been very, very pro-Caribbean in advancing our cause. I don't know if it is because Barbados had colonized South Carolina at one stage, but there's a connection between the Caribbean and South Carolina, which we are very pleased to bring to the table at this point in time. So we do have and have had really good diplomatic contacts on this matter, and it is beginning to bear fruit. I'm sure that the numbers that you're seeing now would not be the only numbers, because as soon as the United States comes out of a utilization zone, where they are now, they're still talking about vaccinating 70% of their population by a particular date. They're still on track to do that. And when that has been achieved, it will make it easier for others to get what the factories are producing. And of course, the Europeans are also making contributions to the COVAX. So we are really positive that the COVAX will not shut down after we get our third shipment. We anticipate to get some more from there. So in summary, we have vaccines in hand now. We're going to use up all. The second dosing will take place both for AstraZeneca and for Sinopharm now. And first dosing will take place by the end of June into July. A lot of first dosing take place. And in August, first shipments from the Johnson & Johnson. And by September, we can look backwards at how much we have done and how much more we need to do, and we believe that then the back of it would have been broken. So the next 8 to 12 weeks, most important, to keep the graph going in the direction that Dr. Hines has been showing us. Do not for 1 minute believe that now we can exhale. We know what happens when we drop our guard. To get the best outcome from this vaccination program, you get that by being most responsive to the other aspects of the fight. Because the healthier we are, the more effective will be the vaccination program. Simply because healthier people will respond better in the event of infections. If, on the other hand, it's the other way around, where you're requiring to vaccinate a lot of sick and dying people, you don't get the full effects of the vaccination program. So we are going to take steps now to continue to focus on those things that work, those things that keep the curve going in the direction that Dr. Hines has been pointing out, and doing the things that Dr. Trotman had been pleading for, and getting, hopefully, the reports that we're getting from Dr. Richards that our hospitals are not overflowing, that they're not overrun, that our healthcare people are not overwhelmed while staying on the job and working full-time, but we are beginning to see the light in the tunnel that directs a clearer path for us. And our target here now, you remember we had a target last December where if we kept doing what we were doing, we'll bring our children out, primary school children, secondary school children in January. We were able to do that. And then we had set a target to bring the primary school children out after Easter. We weren't able to do that. And everybody knows why. And of course, we are now setting a new target to get vaccinated and to bring our school children out in September. Those are the targets we're working with now. And we're really going to be very firm on good behavior. We want to be very responsible at the individual level. We want to encourage you to take the vaccine that is in front of you, because the best vaccine for you is the one that you can get as early as possible, as quickly as possible. Right? And because we are having different brands, don't get involved in the brand specific. They're all doing the same thing. There's none that's growing more teeth and none that's growing longer fingernails. They're all doing the same thing, which is preparing you to respond to the virus. And the quicker you do that, the better for all of us. An unvaccinated person is a threat because the virus loves you. And you will remain there to be a casualty, to be an infector, to get sick, to overwhelm the hospital. So Trinidad and Tobago is now focusing on vaccines that are available to us. Now, I hope we'll put this private sector thing to bed and not get confused. Even as I speak to you now, the situation that exists in April still exists. There are other ways that the private sector can help, and I hope that they don't help by doing what happened here last weekend. I was very disappointed when I saw the 3 headlines in the 3 newspapers. Headlines in the newspapers from an idle man who got on television to tell the population that the Prime Minister is a liar, that vaccines are available, have been purchased, have been brought into the country, the type that some people want, and of course it's only available to preference people. Now, some people may have assumed that that is how it would have gone, managing this virus. That is not how it did go in Trinidad and Tobago. The government had been out front, up front, and with the people, with me as Prime Minister leading from the front, with your healthcare system standing in the breach day and night for over a year to ensure that you get the best outcome in a pandemic. Yes, we have lost some lives, and we feel it every time the numbers come through to us. Some of them are people we know. As I speak to you right now, there's a funeral going on right now that I should be in. And many of you may have lost friends, dear ones, loved ones. We are in a pandemic. We are not in the post-pandemic period. Your government puts the responsibility on its shoulder, as it must, by oath of office, to ensure that the interests of the wider national population comes first at every time. So, today, we are going to alert you to what we're going to do in the next, hopefully, and this is barring any flare-up or any general misconduct population-wise, providing we stay on this track. Yesterday I met with a team of our ministers and Caribbean Airline, that's our national airline, that has been on the ground now for a year and how many? Heavily funded by you, the taxpayer, but we've preserved it. And just as we were in mid-March, about to take some decisions as to what we do about the border closure, we've had that discussion yesterday, and I hope we get a better result this time. In the coming days, probably on Tuesday, the team, health, and other relevant personnel would meet with Caribbean Airlines, because it's the government's position that within the next 4 to 6 weeks, we would do away with the border closure arrangement and the exemption system, because as we vaccinate, and as vaccination has been accelerated in North America in particular, the situation is different now. The populations of North America and the Caribbean can now more easily mix, and we are better able to manage people coming into the country. And I look forward to the day when nobody will have to ask permission to come home, but you qualify to get in under certain circumstances which are your responsibility and not for the government to tell you yea or nay. And those details will come to you in the next few days. By the end of next week, you will get the clear details as to what the open airport would mean, and Caribbean Airlines would begin to fly scheduled flights, and persons coming into the country should be of the same ilk as those who are coming to us from outside, as us going out. But there will be controls, and there will be categorization of your condition. I say no more on that today, except to indicate that we are close to the point of removing the exemption border closure arrangement. And of course, removing the taxpayer being responsible for funding Caribbean Airlines at 100% while they don't fly. Hopefully that will change very soon. When we examine the performance of the country in detail, we can say that the medicine that we have been taking with respect to the stay off, stay away, stay home arrangements, what you loosely call the lockdowns, has been working. It's been working. And if it's been working, we need to use it. So there'll be an adjustment, especially for the month of June. For the month of June, as we brighten our perspective with vaccine being available, vaccines coming, payments made, shipments confirmed. As we do that, as Dr. Hines and Dr. Richards give us a little indication that things are getting a little better, going in the right direction, as Dr. Parasham could relax a little bit now, not too much, but things are not going badly. We think that it's going in the right direction, and we must keep it going in that direction and help it to go in that direction faster. So I want to ask you all to postpone the expected weekend mixing and the weekend automatic partying and the weekend automatic liming. Let us do a bit more, because we did behave very well, I must say, in the last two holidays, Monday and Thursday, and we expect that those two periods would contribute to the graph that we'll see sometime soon. But come Friday evening, we would not like this situation to change much. So you work, and we'd like the curfew on Friday evening to begin at 7 p.m. until Saturday morning at 5 o'clock. 7 to 5 Friday evening. And you come out on Saturday, and as you come out, please don't come out to congregate. Come out for emergencies and essentials only. 7 p.m., the curfew starts again, Saturday evening to Sunday morning at 5. And then you have your Sunday again doing whatever is essential. And the curfew starts again at 7 till 5 a.m. Monday morning. And that is how, as of now, it will be for the month of June. Weekends are to be contributed to our effort. And during the daytime, it is not a free-up party because there's no curfew on the daytime. The order is still to stay away unless you are categorized to come out. And that means you'll come out to work hugely aware of the need to work during the pandemic, whether you are working essential or you will get some more information very soon. It is our intention to vaccinate and operate. Going forward from next week, you will be encouraged to vaccinate and operate. And in order to do that, the Ministry of Health will have specific programs interfacing with the private sector. And this is where the private sector could play a major role, especially since you have now, I hope by now I've convinced you that you have no role yet in vaccine supply. You can play a major role in getting your staff vaccinated. And what we're going to do is put this by categories. You will have heard the Minister of Health saying that we are working with the Supermarket Association to get their staff and their associates vaccinated. We'll do the same thing with the construction sector. You will get more information in the next few days. In anticipation that construction could restart the following week, and the staff directly involved in construction would be a targeted staff for vaccination. Special efforts would be made to make vaccination available to those workers who are involved in the construction sector. And of course, those people who have export orders, we know who you are because you have made a representation. Those people who have export orders in the manufacturing sector, we will grant exemptions to vaccinate and operate and export. And of course, we will preserve those markets that or orders that we are about to lose. And that is all part of living with the virus and not dying from the virus while livelihoods are preserved, while life is preserved. But this is hugely dependent on disciplinary action. We have to be a disciplined people. Our essential workers, the group that you know about already, are out there. We are now going to bring out some more people. But remember, we are doing that during an outbreak. When we came back out last year, we came back out after we had suppressed to a point where there wasn't an outbreak. We now think we can manage the situation now to bring groups of people out, and over time, you'll be told when your group is to come out. And please don't upset yourself by talking about discrimination and talking about, I should have been out. We are doing this in a systematic way, looking at the overall national population and activities. And if you are engaged in an activity, which is in fact by its very nature and totality about bringing people together for frivolity, you're a low priority. Just understand that. Those who are saving our lives and our livelihoods, you are the higher priority. And very soon we should be able to report that those who are saving our lives, our healthcare people, all those who want to be vaccinated, that they all have been vaccinated. And the same thing, those who are handling our food, they all would be. And of course, those who are protecting us, the defense force, the police, they all would have been. And as we go that way, we're taking the whole population along. And somewhere in there, you will come. For example, by the time we get to week 10, where the vaccines are coming in from the African supply platform, we should be in a situation where anybody who wants a vaccine should be able to get it. Because we should have enough and have it widely available. And I want to mention to you, this country has an infrastructure like no other at the national level, where there's virtually a health facility in every community in this country, everyone. And as soon as we have enough vaccines, we will use up all of those facilities to ensure that every community can access the vaccines that are available. There's no community in this country that I know of where there isn't a health facility, a health center or something within striking distance of that population. The one that I know that's furthest away must be Platanal. And of course, if they need help, you go in there and get them. And of course, as we do this in this way, I am told, and I'm very pleased to hear that the possibility exists, that we could put some mobile vaccinating platforms out there where vaccinators can eventually come to you, specific groups of people, and vaccinate you where you are rather than you coming to them. Because we want to get, once we put our hands on vaccines, those vaccines are not going to be in the shelf or in the fridge. We want them in your arms. And that is where we are at the moment. And I hope that nothing happens that would cause a reversal of the expectation by virtue of a development that would prevent the supply to come to us from the manufacturer. You would have heard about what happened in Baltimore with the contamination of a supply that we were looking towards and so on. So things can happen. But we are being positive and being confident that by and large, the situation is that we now have a stream of vaccines to come to us, which we will utilize in an aggressive way. And you do your part by getting vaccinated. And of course, still following the washing of the hands, the staying away from people, and of course, everything that you can do to not allow the virus to propagate. Every person who avoids being sick, and I should know, I don't know what I did to caused myself to be infected. I thought I was being as responsible as possible, but I did get infected, and my illness attracted the attention of healthcare givers, from ambulance driver to nurse to doctor to manager of the hospital. The workload just gets increased. With every person who gets infected, try and not, so that the workload drops. And of course, with the best will in the world, we can only have so many hospital beds. We can only quarantine so many people. And once we are not overwhelmed in those two areas, we could say that we are doing reasonably well in a pandemic. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions for any of us. Oh, sorry. The Minister will tell us a little more about
the vaccination
this vaccination program.
Thank you very much, Honourable Prime Minister. Minister Young, Minister Hines, CMO, doctors, ladies and gentlemen of the media, members of the viewing and listening public, wherever you are, good Saturday afternoon. Before I start, I want to recognize and thank the Honourable Prime Minister for the lead role he has played in the whole issue of vaccine procurement in an era of vaccine shortage. Prime Minister, your leadership has been nothing short of absolutely spectacular. And Trinidad and Tobago will owe you, at the end of this vaccination program, and the Caribbean, I may add, a debt of gratitude. Thank you very much. I want to thank also healthcare workers again, all categories of healthcare workers, who again have risen to the challenge of serving Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister would have told you about his strategy for vaccine acquisition. It is now my duty to tell you about the program for vaccine delivery into the arms of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. The numbers I'm going to call are the current numbers based on what we have in stock now. The AstraZeneca vaccines, as the Honourable Prime Minister said, we have currently 144,200, and we expect another 33,600. That will take us up to a committed amount of 177,800 doses. It means, therefore, we can fully vaccinate, divide by 2, 88,900 persons, and we are aiming to do this by mid-July. The second dose of AstraZeneca vaccine delivery starts on Monday, as you know. The other brand, which is equally as good, the Sinopharm, the 100,000 gift. Initially, we were going to deliver 50,000 and hold back 50,000 for the second shot. Because now we have an expected regular supply, we are going to be using all 100,000. So that means you can vaccinate now 50,000 persons fully. So therefore, with these two initiatives, we will be able to vaccinate fully 138,900 persons by July. That will change with each new shipment that we get in. So we do expect, as the Honourable Prime Minister has said, a commercial shipment of vaccines this week. So those numbers will be layered on top of that. What is the strategy we are going to pursue? We are setting up some mass vaccination sites under the management and control of the Ministry of Health, partnering with the private sector. We have allocated the following to several private sector organizations, as the Honourable Prime Minister said: vaccinate and operate, vaccinate and open, vaccinate and operate. The Supermarket Association, they have asked for 4,000 doses, has been allocated. The Pharmacy Association, 1,000 allocated. Supermarkets and Pharmacy Association have joined together in one. So together they have been allocated 5,000 doses. They have chosen their site, I think, in Chaguanas. We are helping them to manage the site. We will provide them with the vaccines, and they start their program on Tuesday. The construction industry has been allocated in the first instance 5,000 doses. They are going to start at 2 sites by the end of next week. Manufacturing under TTMA has asked for 5,000 doses in the first instance. They start tomorrow at the Diwali Nagar site. So between those 3 initiatives, 15,000 persons in 3 significant industries can be vaccinated. The other 2 groups we are targeting are the private security industries and the food and beverage industries. I have already reached out to the 2 presidents of the private security associations. They are following the same template. So this public-private partnership in vaccinating their membership will deepen in the coming months, coming days and weeks. Similarly with food and beverage, vaccinate, operate. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you go Independence Square and buy your favorite box of chicken and chips again? Vaccinate, operate. I am looking forward to going back by Kelvin to buy doubles. Kelvin, you get free advertising there. Or sauce. No, but this is serious. We want people to come back out, but under the condition that you are vaccinated. So we are targeting specifically these people. By working with the private sector, it means I take out about 25 to 40,000 persons, put them in their special zones so they don't go to the public health system. That is part of the strategy. How do we then free up vaccines in these quantities that we have now for the elderly? If I could have this slide, which I think should, right, continuation of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, Sinopharm. Next slide, please. We started in about 32 health centers. As the Prime Minister indicated last week, we will not be holding back the other 50,000 of Sinopharm. Part goes to Supermarket Association, part goes to manufacturing, and we are going to be releasing about 20,000 back into the public healthcare system, starting from Wednesday. The health centers already have to deliver Sinopharm vaccines to people already on their books who made appointments. That process finishes on Tuesday. Additional doses of Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccines will be distributed on Wednesday, 9th June. For your first dose, and we are doing away with the appointment system. It is going to be walk-in, first come, first serve for persons over 60, with or without NCDs, and persons under 60 with NCDs. Many of the elderly tell us they don't have access to WhatsApp, they don't use technology, they don't have internet access. And we must pay attention to that feedback. So elderly and walk-in, first come, first serve. Next slide, please. So we originally had 32 health centers. In purple, under ERHA, we are now adding the Manzanilla Outreach Center from Wednesday. So folks in Manzanilla, together with Sangre Grande, Mayaro, Rio Claro, Toco, you can now walk in and get your vaccination. NCRHA has year 7. Under Northwest, we are adding the Pitti Valley Health Center to complement Diego Martin, Carenage, San Juan, Santa Cruz, Barataria, Morvan. Under Southwest, they had 12 health centers. We are now adding Penal Rock Road Health Center and Moruga Health Center, rural areas, so people don't have to travel, great distances. And in Tobago, the same 3 will apply. So we are ramping up from 32 to 36. Now the question that may be asked, why not all 109? Because the number of vaccines, if you spread it too thinly, they will finish in a health center, and you create another problem. We will roll out all 109 in the coming weeks as more and more vaccines come in. Huh? 109. 109. As more and more vaccines come in, it is the objective of the Ministry of Health to make vaccines available literally a stone's throw away from where you live. We will be migrating now to all 109 health centers as vaccines come in larger and larger amounts. We will be activating all our mass vaccination sites. We have plans for village outreaches, mobile units, drive-thrus. We'll be targeting the shut-ins, and also we want to target in that phase special groups, example, the blind, the infirm, and so on. All those plans are there. We may even go to Brian Lara Promenade, Harris Promenade, the Esplanade in Tobago. Vaccine availability is going to become very, very easy for the average Trinidadian and average Tobagonian, whether you live in a city, a urban setting, or a rural setting. I want to give you some idea of what you could expect by August. As the Prime Minister said, we expect massive amounts. We don't know the tranches yet of Johnson & Johnson vaccines. If the population, as they have done, respond as they have been doing to the vaccination program, we could vaccinate in Trinidad and Tobago using the full reach of 109 health centers, mass vaccination sites, mobile units, targeted interventions. We could deliver about 300,000 doses per month. So in 2 to 3 months, we could vaccinate close to 900,000 persons. But that is on top of what we are doing now. By August, with our supply that we have now, as I said, we could vaccinate 138,000 persons. So Trinidad and Tobago, very good days are ahead for us with the vaccination program. We are working with the private sector under our guidance. Tomorrow I will be at the Diwali Nagar site to kick off the Manufacturers Association at 10 a.m. I will be with the Supermarket Association on Tuesday at 2 p.m. to kick them off. We are working with the private security, we are working with construction, and then food and beverage. I will just close with the mantra, vaccinate and operate. Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now we get to the question sections, if you have any questions. It has not been unknown for there to be no questions, right? That is a secondary consideration, which if we go back up to the position of the WHO, you would have seen Dr. Tedros saying to the vaccine users, no, suppliers and users, not to vaccinate children because the vaccines are in such great demand for the adult population. If we get to a situation where our adult vaccination program is sufficiently well done, that we can consider vaccinating children with vaccines that are approved for children, that's a great position to be in. It is right now, the only prospect that we have to access vaccines that are children approved, and Doc might be able to clarify that for me. Doctor, which are the vaccines? It's a Moderna and Pfizer, right? Moderna and Pfizer. Yeah, just say a word on those two vaccines, please. They're not in the forefront of our program right now.
Yeah, so Moderna and Pfizer, both, Pfizer is recommended for 16 and above. In the US, they have been granted FDA approval for 12 and above. There are ongoing trials for Pfizer and Moderna across the world that has begun from actually 0 years of age all the way up. So those are trials to see if they're actually working, the side effects, those kinds of things that is going on. So far, WHO holds for the Pfizer 16 and above, everything else 18 and above. So there's no, as PM said, there's no approval as yet from WHO for use beyond those age groups. But we are hopeful with the FDA approving, and I think there was a UK approval as well recently for 12 and above, that WHO will consider it. And of course, if these vaccines become available, we can use it in that age group once WHO approves.
So, the summary to the answer to your question is, that is not in front of us now. But if children-approved vaccines become available, we will use them when they become available. Either we'll purchase them, or if we get gifts, we'll use them, but we only will use WHO-approved vaccines on our children. Now, the prospect of what may come to us from the United States, it is more than likely that those vaccines would be AstraZeneca and probably Johnson & Johnson, because of the availability of the others. But if commercial Moderna or Pfizer become available, which can be used on children, and we will not shy away from trying to obtain vaccines to become even more vaccinated. But even without the children being vaccinated, once we have a heavy vaccination on the adult population, the children out of school could be a part of our existence then. But we based on what you heard from Dr. Parashamde, you would understand that that is not something that we can do now, but we'll keep our eyes on it, and things might change considerably between now and September.
I know at the last press conference you talked about hardware as being close to 1 week. Any consideration for a reopening on a rotational basis, as you said?
Yes, there is consideration, and part of our vaccinate and operate will include, that's another group, hardwares, and we expect that you will get those details coming next week, right? So we will capture a significant amount of our interactive people. You will have gathered from now that we are focusing on the interactive people, and hardwares would be one of that. And if construction is, if the list can grow and grow. But once we are in a position and we have the vaccine, we are going to be spreading out, right? Because if we are all vaccinated, then we can do much more and be a little more interactive.
That we have a need for a weekend curfew from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m.
And that starts tomorrow night, eh?
Right. Now, the thing is, what would have prompted that move now, given the fact that we already have an SOE in place and, there are restrictions already? What would have now led to this?
Well, it's just a question of making the restrictions capture more time. We are being less interactive on a wider spectrum, more time that we are not interactive. So instead of, and again, like on a Friday evening, Saturday evening, we are eliminating the prospect of gatherings.
I'm now going to ask one of the health officials to tell us, in the last 2 weeks now, we've seen the SOE would have been in place, restrictions already in place, and we would have seen numbers.
I'm not hearing you clearly.
The SOE and the restrictions would have been in place over the last 2 weeks. But
They're not separate things, it's one and the same.
Right, but we would have seen the numbers still exceeding, the large numbers in terms of new infections. Where would these new infections have been observed? In what sort of settings? Because we're taking persons away from non-essential activities. We're leaving things open like groceries, pharmacies, just essential service providers. Where would the authorities have noticed that those spikes?
I would want the doctors to respond to that, because from where I sit, I'm not making these decisions based on micro systems. Look at the national population. But if you want information as to where it might have come, we may not have to look very far.
Okay, thank you for the question. As we keep emphasizing, in a population that has a fairly high prevalence of circulating virus, the interactions will occur just about anywhere. The infections pop up just about anywhere. So whether it is persons interacting within their homes, within their workplaces, the whole structure of The current epidemic is that because there are so many people that are potentially currently carrying virus, any interaction or any probability of interaction carries a probability of infection. So when we take 2 hours out of a day, we basically take 2 million person hours out of the probability of interacting. It doesn't sound like a lot when you say 2 hours in a day, but you multiply each hour by each person, and you start to see where the probability of reducing those contacts starts to add up. So this is the thought process behind the approach, because basically people are being infected as they come into contact with asymptomatic individuals in settings unknown.
In continuation to the question, a lot of people who are still COVID positive are being sent home to self-isolate. Do you think that is also contributing to the numbers since as she said, we've been under lockdown, people at home? Do you think that is contributing?
Okay, so this is a question that's been asked several times, and each time the question was asked, we have re-emphasized that the probability of infection within the home has always existed. And when you send persons home to self-isolate, there are guidelines that should be followed. There are activities that we advise people to carry out within their household to reduce that risk of transmission from one person to another in the household, including limiting your movement within the house, keeping your mask on within the house, scheduling bathroom use and bathroom cleaning so that you don't have the potential for cross-contamination in shared surfaces, not sharing utensils. All of these things are things that we keep re-emphasizing with the goal of reducing the risk of infection in the home, because that is and always has been one of the sites where we have seen infections happen in the household, even before the lockdown, in the workplace, and in any other place where you're sharing indoor air for a prolonged period.
Just in asking that question and answering it, you have to get the correct perspective by asking, what is the alternative? The alternative is, I get lots of recommendations. This morning I had to block one of my friends who was trying to confuse my brain cells. But one of the recommendations in response to the question you asked was that the government should go through the entire country, test every household, and anybody found to be infected, that person should be removed from the household and quarantined by the government. And therefore you remove the virus from the household. Now that sounds like something to do. But have you grasped the scale of that operation? And of course, the response from the population to a government coming to take you out of home, to carry you into state quarantine. The last time that happened was leprosy. And in a case of an unseen virus, you could imagine how the population would respond to that. Half of what you'd be told would be lies, because sick people will tell you they're feeling well, so as not to leave home. Remember that story? We did have a situation early on where there was a child who was positive, and the mother of that child had misrepresented her own condition so as to be able to be quarantined with the child. So a lot of the recommendations that you get as the alternative, as I always say in this job, there are always options. And while we could discuss and criticize the option chosen, you don't get a complete picture until you look at the other options. Because it's never a question of you don't do this and it just evaporates. It is either this option or another or other options. And that's when you see the scale of what is being recommended. So it brings us to the point that if we are coming to the conclusion that one of the areas, probably the main area right now, of infections might be interaction at home, then it is even more imperative that individuals be more aware of what goes on in the home. And of course, as you know, there's a limited role for the government, if any at all, inside of the home.
Mr. Prime Minister, in light of what you have announced and the Health Minister in terms of the acceleration with regard to the vaccination drive, how does that factor into the length of the state of emergency in light of the fact that it has been extended by 3 months from the date it began?
That is not a consideration at this time. I mean, the emergency would be utilized as required. We did say that at the first opportunity, it was 90 days, right? The Parliament allows us, the law allows us to go for 90 days. So in managing it now, that is not a consideration. We're not focusing on that. What we like to be in a position within that 90-day period to say that it is no longer necessary to do that. But other than that, we have the opportunity to manage the interactions under law, and we will do that. But what we hope that never happens is that when you come to the 90-day period, that our health situation is such that we want to continue like that. We hope not to be in that position.
And also in terms of just the general, to use that term used last year, roadmap for recovery, out of this particular surge and so on, is there a sense, the government has a sense now of how it would be doing that, so that it would not be a situation of reopening and then having to close sectors again?
Well, that's a good point. You will see a consideration of some point of view that what is it we're doing? Is it that we are opening too fast, too soon? But because we are doing it phased and vaccinated, we are reducing the risk of huge clinical problems. The last time we saw a lot of countries or cities, towns, reluctantly withdrawing, and then you get a good response, and they opened up too soon. And of course, we all know what happened when you open up too soon. But we are going to try to open up at the first opportunity, but with caution. And that's why we've tied our return to our vaccination program. Because I want to emphasize, the vaccination program is saying, not that you will not be exposed, you might be exposed, but if you are exposed, your clinical reaction would be manageable.
And also just another point of clarification, if you don't mind, Prime Minister, or anyone who wants to answer. In terms of employers and employees, if an employee, for any reason, because as you had said, it's not mandatory by law to be vaccinated, it's a choice you're encouraging people. But if someone, under the rights of the Constitution, says, for whatever reason, they do not want to be vaccinated, and an employer may be suggesting, well, this is required as part of any work situation, how does the government, or could you give some guidance in that regard?
Well, the laws and labor laws, nobody's asking anybody to act illegally, but you can act sensibly. If you have a population of vaccinated people, and there are a person or persons who are not vaccinated, the person may be required to work somewhere else, if that is available. But at the end of the day, it's our interaction and our cooperation. I would rather focus on cooperating with those who will do, because one person unvaccinated, as I said, the unvaccinated population will be where the virus will still be smiling. The vaccinated people would make it more difficult for the virus to propagate. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to go? Because in the end, it is only death that tells you that you've had the final outcome. So if there are people who prefer that option for whatever reason, and some people may have good reason, we do know that there are situations where, and as the range of vaccines become available, those reasons may recede. But not getting vaccinated because you just don't want to cooperate with the government. Let's understand something very clearly. This is not about the government. You will not meet the government in any hospital bed. You will not meet the government by the funeral home or in any graveyard. The government is the management of our overall circumstance. And all we are asking the population to do is to first be alert that we are living in a pandemic. 2, anybody could get infected. And 3, anybody could die from the infection. Right? So that is the Russian roulette that we're playing. And don't wait to make an alarm. From this very platform, I had said very early last year, let us not wait until we counting coffins and asking for help to bury people to say that, well, no, this thing is serious. And there were days when we had no infection, we had low infection. We've been in this fight. The fight continues, but it is going to be successfully ended by the participation of every cooperating citizen. And that is why I get very disappointed when some of our citizens from time to time, if you can't help, don't hurt. That gentleman who went on the television and tell people that he knows that Pfizer vaccine coming to the country and you could walk into certain medical supply place and get it and so on. What that does is to create dissent among the population. That some people feel that it's only a certain class of people who will get Pfizer vaccine. And then the vaccine hesitancy, which is the hand grenade that we are afraid of. Right? If vaccine hesitancy or vaccine preference become the behavior of the population, I don't want this vaccine, I'm waiting for the next one, that is where we're going to get in trouble. Right? But right now, I'm pleased to say the overall population, the general sentiment is that people are using the vaccines that are available, and there's demand for it for the purpose of having a population that would be in a better position to respond to a virus which will be with us for a long time.
So just for clarification, the weekend curfew starts tomorrow?
Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock until tomorrow is Sunday, tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock into Monday. And of course, tonight is Saturday night. Please don't go out there tonight and try to congregate, because Minister I.A.N, I think, already asked the police to ask you to go home unless you're in an emergency. And of course, we made all the arrangements for the essential workers who so far, our utilities are working, our essential workers are largely on the job. Of course, not everybody will be cooperating, but the vast majority of our people are cooperating. And we hope that the vast majority will get vaccinated, because the last 3 months, we have moved virtually heaven and earth to be able to say to you that we have a stream of vaccine coming to you. And I think, I feel for the healthcare workers who, for them, they would see a time when they wouldn't be working the way they're working now, because the population would have been in a state where they're not required in that way. Because until we get to that position, they will be required, and they have been required, and they've been doing the job.
About the vaccines from the U.S., the 6 million, that is just a clarification, the 6 million are allocated to Latin America and the Caribbean. Yes.
6 out of 25 million.
Is that going to be filtered through COVAX, or is it a direct
No, those are expected to be on the bilateral arrangement.
Last thing for me is really...
But I may say that the U.S. did say that they would be putting significant supplies into the COVAX.
And so we've seen that also, that we've been a cut with CPAP workers and salary. Is the government looking into more cuts at the moment?
No. You all like that story there? It is not a cut in salary. Let us go back to where it came from. CPAP is a make-work program. Those are not people's jobs. The more we look at it as jobs, you get into difficulty. CPAP is the last, it came after URP. Remember that? What has happened is that we have shut down the program. So they don't get their social support through the program. They now get it as a grant, like other people who have lost their means. So what they're getting is another 3/4 their salary, and that's another story. Because you fell into that. I mean, I would have expected, and I was hoping that that would have been put to you differently. It was not put to you properly. It is not a cut in salary. It is that the program has been shut down because we don't want them out there. And while the program is shut down, they get a grant, like everybody else. The other people who are getting grants, whether they're working in a bar or they're working by your neighbor, it's a grant. So they shouldn't, don't compare that to the salary, you know, because that basically, these make-work programs, when you get into talking about them, about maintaining jobs, is not that. It should be seen as the program being shut down, and the people are getting grants for the period where they're done, and hopefully the program will be restarted. and the normal arrangements go back into play. And what we did, if we had shut the program down and say, okay, let them go to the Social Support Ministry for the grants, all that would have done is send 10,000 people to the ministry to create more problems. But now we know who these people are because we have them in that program. So they are getting their grants through that program. And of course, they then shouldn't be going to the Social Support Ministry for another grant.
Mr. Clarification in terms of the border.
There's something about that mask that makes you not clear to me.
Clarification on the border.
Yes.
Our reopening. Can you tell us at this juncture, how is that going to be done initially? Is it that persons who previously wanting to come home in terms of screening persons?
There would be there would be arrangements put in place, and those arrangements would be determined by your condition, your personal condition, if you're vaccinated or if you're not vaccinated. And of course, by the end of next week, the details of that will be made available, because Carl and the team would be finalizing that, but we do have a program where there would be no requirement for you to apply for any exemption. You will travel as per your own travel arrangements, but to board and to turn up through our immigration here and to meet our health department here, you must meet certain conditions. If you meet certain conditions, you can do certain things. If you don't meet those conditions, you do other things. So that is going to be very clear in the next few days.
Prime Minister, just wondering, in terms of, as you mentioned, the issue of hopefully schools reopening in September, in terms of the vaccination of teachers, will they... Minister?
Yeah. Thank you. So that has already begun. You may recall we did allocate 24,000 doses of vaccines to frontline ministries for their frontline people. So National Security got a block of 4,000. No, National got 6,000. Teachers, my colleague, Minister Nayan Gasbidali, asked for 4,000, and those were done.
The issue of one of the other sectors, I think, was
sure.
Also as an essential categories in terms of banking and whatnot.
Yes.
You did mention
yes.
Pharmacies, supermarkets. What about the banking?
Yes, so I've already reached out to the president of the Bankers Association, Ms. Darbasi, and she's putting together the data for that.
Also for the Prime Minister.
So again, will be vaccinate and operate.
I apologize.
And Minister, while we have you there, in terms of the media themselves, because we have been the
right.
but where are we in terms of the vaccination?
You may recall, I reached out to both MAT and Trinidad and Tobago Printing and Publishers Association. Media workers were vaccinated very early on in the program, and we had put aside a particular weekend for you guys. I got the list. We reached out to you. And the Trinidad and Tobago Printers and Publishers Association, they are being done this week, I believe. So it was up to the individual media house to put media names on the list. And that we did it the same weekend with parliamentarians and local government persons about a month ago. Okay?
I take it that you are not vaccinated. So therefore, I think what the minister should be telling you is, turn up now and get vaccinated.
Lisa, you walked into that.
we want to encourage everybody to get vaccinated, right? As long as you don't have a reason, because you might want to say to me that I am not vaccinated, so both of us not vaccinated. I would love to be, but because I was positive in April, I was, as per the protocol, not able to be vaccinated until October. Fortunately, I'm hearing now that it has changed by the information that is available through scientific work, that I can now be vaccinated after 3 months. I'm looking forward to being vaccinated in July. Yeah?
That's one.
See what I mean? In the meantime, I am very, very careful as to my exposure, because I genuinely believe that the vaccination program is worthy of serious attention.
As you mentioned yourself, Prime Minister, just for people who may be wondering, and some friends of mine have been asking, any reason why you don't wear the mask at the podium?
Because I am sufficiently far away from him who is masked, and I'm very far from you who also masked, and therefore the risk is less than 5%, I'm told. So,
One question left. I'm not sure which of the health officials will take this one. In terms of the survivability rate that I had mentioned earlier, in terms of that graduation from the ward setting into the HDU and then ICU settings, and can you perhaps, while you're up there, doctor, tell us whether or not we're seeing persons who have taken the vaccines being among those who would have been?
and that takes us to 4 o'clock, right?
So if you, sorry, Prime Minister, if you can repeat your questions.
Survivability rate of persons moving from a ward setting to an HDU and then an ICU. What are we seeing persons actually reaching the ICU stage and recovering enough sufficiently to leave the hospital?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The actual numbers we don't know. But of course, you are in the hands of excellent caregivers guided by the CMO. And they are responding. So there are people who, of course, go from ward to HD or ICU or go straight to ICU because they're that ill and recover. Actual data and figures will vary case to case, patient to patient. So difficult to say exact survivability. But there are those stories, and those are the ones that keep us going every single day. And every life that we can help keeps us going every single day. But the bottom line is, don't get COVID. You don't want to get COVID. And one way to do that is to at least try to vaccinate. It doesn't prevent you, but at least if you get it, you won't be coming to us in a hospitalized setting because it's much milder. So don't get COVID. Get vaccinated so that we can operate. Yes? You had a second question? Thank you.
One last question for Minister Liao-Singh. We've been getting reports that some people who were vaccinated early on and therefore should be getting their vaccination early, come June or they have, some of them have not gotten their calls as yet.
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
So that's people like me, because I miss my call. So what the RHAs are doing, I think each RHA has made about 1,000 calls so far. And what we do with a vaccination drive, at the end of it, you do what is called a mop-up. So what the RHAs will do, those persons who, for some reason, didn't answer the phone, transcribe wrong number, phone out of service, we will reach out to them to do a mop-up. But all 62,000 persons who received their first dose, we want to vaccinate them with their second dose by mid-July. What the RHAs, I saw the ERHA actually put out a notice, and the others, that even if you don't get a call and you know your date coming 8 weeks afterwards, right? And I know because I missed my call. I just didn't answer my phone.
Okay, we'll have the last question from, the last two questions. Yes, just Jules.
Prime Minister, in terms of the Attorney General made a comment in a Twitter space concerning Carnival. The next Carnival will be the mother of all carnivals, but does that necessarily mean Carnival 2022 or beyond the next year?
Let's take it in bite-sized chunks, eh? And I will leave you and the Attorney General for Carnival. It's too early to be talking about Carnival 2022. We are the hurdle of school in September. That's the hurdle we're looking at. And if we can have school in September, then it's quite likely that we'd be. We're also having a, there's supposed to be the English tour. Yes. We're hoping to host, we are bidding for a couple games. So that's the kind of thing that's in front of us. Yeah, and we're hosting the under-19 cricket, is it? So there are some things like that. So Carnival, it would be wonderful if we're able, but let's not get distracted by that now. And we've hopefully by then, the vaccination program would be behind us. And then, of course, how we live from there on in another story. Because if Doc talks to you, he'll talk to you about, we don't know that this vaccination, what the immunity, what the length of time is. If the length of the immunity is a year or 9 months and COVID is still around, what does that mean for next year? So those conversations will come to you from doctors and the international experts. One other question here?
Question for me. With SCA, I know SVA has been postponed to, I think, July 1st. With vaccines readily available now and coming in the future, And with children not being able to be vaccinated, any concerns with spread among that?
I don't know that we could tell you anything other than what we told you already. We're not vaccinating children at this stage. There are no vaccines that are widely available. The two that are approved, we don't expect to have them in our hands very soon, and certainly not by the time of the exam. But I did say, given the state of the country, that kind of activity would be of a sufficiently low risk to take place, and we'll go ahead and do that. When we meet again next week, when I meet with you next week, we are going to go back to the program of the various phases and what we do in each phase. So our phase 1 would be state of play next week, and then we go from there. So we'll have, the targets would be clearer, and the groups would be known. So we go back to that next week. But as of now, things are not at its best, but it's a whole lot better than it could have been. Thank you all very much.